Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Judicial Watch. I'm your host, Jerry Dunleavy. The internet. It's integral to our lives, the way we do business, communicate, interact. Today we'll be discussing the importance of protecting a free and open internet, and we'll be analyzing issues ranging from so-called net neutrality to potential political bias among big tech companies that could stifle the free expression of ideas on these platforms. Joining me today as a special guest to discuss all of these issues is Congressman Tim Huelskamp, the president of the Heartland Institute. So thank you very much for joining me today, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So to give our viewers just a quick background on yourself and your institution, the Heartland Institute is a leading free market think tank. Its mission is to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions. And before joining the Heartland Institute, Congressman Huelskamp served as a congressman from Kansas's 1st Congressional District. Prior to that, he also served as 10 years as the chairman of the IT committee in the Kansas State House. So wide range of knowledge, and we're glad that you decided to lend your expertise with us today, sir.
Well, thank you. And actually, the Heartland is a great connection. It is the Heartland Institute I'm the president of now, plus my congressional district was literally in the heartland of America, the continental center of the United States, right in the middle of the heartland of America, of rural America. So a lot of views and opinions and real needs for access to the internet.
Amen to that. So let's jump into this. One of the issues sort of dominating the discussion about a free and open internet is net neutrality. Sort of a big buzzword, but a lot of people perhaps don't always know exactly what net neutrality, so-called, entails. So if you wouldn't mind walking our viewers through a little bit about sort of the genesis of the idea of net neutrality, and then how that actually played out in practice.
Well, I think, unfortunately, the left won the words battle by grabbing net neutrality. But in essence, looking back at the internet, that's exactly what we've had, in the sense that it was a wide open free market of access and of ideas on the internet. But you fast forward to the Obama administration, what they wanted to change was make certain that you had net neutrality, but it was controlled by the government. And we're back to the same old debate that we have in public policy as we have in a free and open society. Who gets to decide? Who gets the access and who is able to get on the internet, where they're able to go? And under the Obama administration, under net neutrality, they wanted to make certain that the subscribers didn't decide, the viewers didn't decide, the marketplace didn't decide, but they would let some bureaucrat, i.e. a politician controlling a bureaucrat, could decide access to the internet. And that was their the attempt at the FCC to impose government-mandated so-called net neutrality, which essentially was government control of the internet.
And let's sort of talk about the reasons why they might have tried to impose something like that. Because, before net neutrality, that buzzword there again, but before net neutrality was sort of imposed by the Obama administration, the growth of the internet was kind of spectacular. And the applications of the internet and the ways that it was used and the different platforms sort of exploded in a good way across the world, connecting people and sort of revolutionizing the way that people talk, do business. So what was sort of the reasoning behind why we would need something like this when things seem to be moving in such a stellar direction?
Well, you might assume, and the viewers might assume, that somehow the government thought they could do a better job. That certainly was the case. You also might assume that the government likes innovation, which actually is not the case. But there is no doubt the internet, access, new technology has heightened the standard of living for Americans. Indeed, all those over the world through the internet. A massive increase in our standard of living, great idea, and a great impact. However, what worries folks in power, what worries particularly the Democrat Party, what worried the Obama administration, it was out of their control. if you're going to tend to impose a worldview that the government knows best, and you have this internet out there that, contrary to Al Gore's claim, was not created by the government and not controlled by the government. It was the age-old attempt by big government, centralized government, to impose their will on a marketplace that was working. It was working just fine. I thought it was always kind of interesting where you have now the big tech companies suddenly whining that the internet's out of control when they've cornered the market. And we see that in so many other places where the market's working well, there's innovation going on, the government comes in to essentially to screw it up and to control it. And that's essentially for, in the views of many businesses, they see a government as a way to control the marketplace and push out the competitors. So what we look at innovation and breakthrough and raising the standard of living, for those in power, for those on the left, it's a threat to their view that they know best. And so the internet is the single best example of how government control is unnecessary to grow our economy and create and promote freedom.
And you brought up an interesting point there about a lot of the big tech companies suddenly sort of getting on board with this idea that the government should play a bigger role and that sort of thing. So sort of the big ones that were on board with that sort of idea, Facebook, Google, Twitter, those sorts of organizations sort of got on board with this idea that the government should have a heavier hand. Now, I think you alluded to this, that now that they've sort of cornered the market, now that they've established themselves, they would then be okay with government regulation. Because, well, yeah, explain why, because we do see this quite a bit.
Yeah, and one thing to point out is, who is the government? Who's controlling the levers of power? Is it the marketplace where you have free entry and free exit, new folks can show up? Whatever happened to MySpace? Whatever happened to all these tech startups that made it or didn't make it? And but what I think Facebook and these other tech giants do see is there's no quote-unquote independent government authorities. They believe they control it, and they had free access to the Obama administration. They were colluding with him, I think, during the election cycles. They were working with Hillary Clinton. I think that's starting to come out. So they didn't think the government was outside. They knew they could control the government. They knew they could control the FCC. So the big three, the big four, whatever the count is, they knew they could control government. So they saw net neutrality as a way to prevent new competition. There is no doubt about it. And so it's interesting. Well, supposedly if you're in the innovation business, suppose you're in the internet business, why would you want control from government? Well, control from government really was key, was control by them to prevent any changes. So it's kind of the old antitrust issue of the past, in which you had a few major companies can control the government, whether it was in the railroad business and plenty of other businesses. And the government at that time said, we got to break up. That's why they passed antitrust laws, is to prevent this massive corporate control of the government and the regulation. So we saw this develop. In a way, it happened more quickly and a more grand scale. But they wanted to use the government under net neutrality to come in and be anything but neutral, but to stand on the scale on behalf of the current providers, the current players in the market, against those that would come in the future. And we see that in so many areas of the media and throughout multiple industries. There is no doubt the history of government in this country has been the attempt of certain individuals that think they're more important and smarter than the rest of us to come in and control our access to power, our access to freedom, access to markets. What we believe at the Heartland Institute is government doesn't know best. Certainly, let the people decide, and that's what net neutrality. At the end of the day, true internet freedom is letting the customer decide, not some bureaucrat on a council of 3 people at a commission get to decide whether or not you get Netflix. And that is a bad way to make a decision. It's failed throughout all of history.
And here at Judicial Watch, we kind of came at it from a similar way. We did what we could to battle back against sort of the imposition of these government regulations in court. Essentially, it was our opinion, similar to yours, that net neutrality regulations were not going to benefit consumers so much as they were going to benefit power brokers in Washington, D.C., and these big companies that had already sort of established themselves. Because regulation tends to, these big companies can handle regulation. It's the smaller ones, startups, that would be stifled. So fast forward to the Trump administration. The Obama administration's FCC had imposed sort of a slew of different regulations, net neutrality, as they said. Ajit Pai, appointed by President Trump to join the FCC, and what tact does the Trump administration take when it comes to net neutrality, when it comes to internet freedom?
Well, I would say a very un-Washington track. I mean, the idea of any government agency, whether they're whoever's really controlling them and controlling the strings, and what politicians and what bureaucrats and what power brokers, but for any Washington agency to say, hey, no, that's not our job. Let's get out of the business of regulating the internet, essentially of controlling the internet, of controlling content. And that was phenomenal. The chairman actually went through, and it's very rare in political history, in American history, and world history that any government agency says, you know what, let's get out of this business. Let the people decide. They're smart enough to make those decisions. So it was a pure free market decision and reflected very well our American values of that the government does not know best. So very exciting to see that happen, but very unusual in a way, very surprising. No matter who the administrator is in an agency, it's very rare you'd see such a respect actually for people and respect for consumers and customers that somehow, again, these three commissioners under Obama decided that they knew better than millions, perhaps billions and trillions of people what was best for the internet. So again, that is what scares the big tech companies the most, is that you mean somebody out there could choose somebody else? Absolutely. That they have to innovate every day if they want to keep up? Absolutely. So that they could lock in place their current control of the marketplace and of the political marketplace as well. And the Chairman Pai coming in here just blew that all up and returned to, essentially what is the way a market can work and should work.
And like you said, it's pretty shocking to see the government actually willingly give up a little bit of power. So one of the hopes, advocates of the idea that the government should be should not be in this business, that we should let the free market innovate and that sort of thing. There are areas where we do need innovation. There's a so-called digital divide right now. Access to broadband in urban areas versus rural areas and that sort of thing. Do you see, with the government sort of stepping out of the way again, do you see a possibility where we're going to be able to see more innovation in the digital space and see more innovation in broadband access and see those benefits sort of broadly expand even in the outside of urban areas, even in the rural areas that need it most?
Well, the history of technology and innovation in America, indeed around the world, was always in spite of government regulation. It was government regulations and control that holds back innovation. If the U.S. Patent Office had their way in 1800, we would have no new inventions. And the idea that somehow some government bureaucrat, indeed a politician, can somehow see in the future and predict the way it's supposed to be, without a doubt, let me say it again, Al Gore did not invent the internet. If he did, why are there so many problems with it? Wouldn't you have figured that out at the beginning? But at the end of the day, innovation will take place. It's already taken place. It's been taking place for years, despite the government regulation. And I will tell you, particularly in the space of technology and in the space of the internet, regulations that I saw when I was in the state level, by the time the state agency figured out what was going on and could pass a regulation to somehow fix a problem, by that time, the technology had already changed. I still remember in 1996, before I was in the state legislature, that year I think they passed a regulation that mandated every citizen in Kansas should have access to, 48 kilobits a second. Because that was the technology. Within 2 months, it was outdated. And the idea that somebody at the FCC or somebody at the state level government or some bureaucrat somehow, by the way, the innovation that's happening, those bureaucrats can't even understand it. They can't even keep up with it. But a case in point is if you look at the recent hearing on Facebook and Mr. Zuckerberg. I mean, people that were asking those questions. But I will tell you that the head of Facebook, he did not ever volunteer to let the government decide his business. He wanted the government to decide everybody else's business on net neutrality, but he did not once offer, says, hey, I will let you decide. He didn't say, well, Senator Cruz, I'll let you decide, or Mr. Chairman, I'll let you decide. No, they wanted to decide themselves. But again, the imposition of net neutrality was to control government, to impose that on their competitors. So that's the exact opposite of innovation. So to answer your question, I think we'll continue to see grand innovation. And in rural America, yeah, they need access in my hometown just like anywhere else. But in many cases, case in point, in my rural state, in rural southwest Kansas, we had in 1992, when I was just out of high school, they already had distance learning classes going on, probably for the first time about in the entire country. How did that happen? There was some local investment. They decided to do that. So they were bridging the digital divide in many cases long before the urban areas were doing that. And so I think it's a false narrative that somehow somebody in Washington, D.C., number one, can figure out how to do things better for rural America, and number one, even really cares about it. At the end of the day, that's really not what they care about. They care about control and power. And net neutrality is the biggest statement the government ever had to say, hey, we know better than you are. At the end of the day, they didn't care about that. They cared about control and power. So we will have massive amounts of innovation, and the government won't be able to keep up. And so I'm very confident on that, because that's the history of the internet, that despite government regulation and attempt control, we've had massive innovation. And once you take that choker off the internet, I think you're going to see some massive innovation continue to go forward. And it will disrupt. It will disrupt the internet. It will disrupt Facebook. It will disrupt the current tech companies, which is why they're pushing back so hard so they can control their market share.
I think you're absolutely right on that. That these things innovate so quickly that the idea that government regulation is going to be able to keep up is a little bit difficult to believe. And you saw that, as you referenced, on display a bit in the hearings on Capitol Hill with Facebook. And speaking of that, as we can close out here, there are some calls from sometimes from conservatives that these various tech companies are, I think it's safe to say, do display various levels of bias at certain times when it comes to conservative free expression on their platforms and that sort of thing. And so while many on the right say that the government should not be involved with things like net neutrality and regulating the internet, you do, however, see calls from some on the right to get involved in regulating what these big tech companies can do when it comes to sort of policing their own platforms. So what is your take on the role that government should play, if any, when it comes to how these different platforms sort of operate and exercise?
Yeah, there certainly is bias. There's massive amounts of bias of the folks on the left that want to control, which is why net neutrality is still so important to them. That's the next stage of their game, is to completely shut down any counter opinion on that. So what do we do about that? So usually the approach in America from the right has been, if there's controlled speech, you need more of it. We need to promote that. We need to provide more access. We need to provide alternative routes. But that makes the responsibility, I think, places back on the American people. You have to push back. You have to look at alternative sources of information. And I think a case in point of how that can happen, despite the massive fake news media, despite the controls on politicians in Washington, the idea, if you roll back 2 years ago and think, could Donald Trump ever defeat Hillary Clinton, all the apparatuses of power, a Republican Party that was accepting of defeat, most of them, some of the key folks, 2 weeks before that, were helping the defeat of Donald Trump. Somehow he won that. Somehow he broke through on that. So, but what that means is we have to always be pushing back, always fighting back. We have to encourage folks like James O'Keefe and others who are exposing this bias. But I think it's just a false narrative. Somehow there's going to be somebody in the government, somebody in Washington is going to be looking out for us. We have a Constitution that's supposed to limit the ability of that, because we believe that the ideas of freedom are better than the ideas of central power and control. And so there's certainly cases where we have laws on the book to prevent antitrust, in which certain folks are trying to control our access to all kinds of products. But the way you break that up, and today, that's why the internet's the best example where you don't need that, because it has disrupted every industry. And so I fully expect we'll have massive ongoing disruptions, and that's what they fear. That's what the tech companies fear, that the latest startup could be their end and their demise. And so they're literally billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and trillions of dollars riding on making no change to the system. And but I don't think you can hold back freedom. I don't think you can hold back innovation. And that's always the attempt of the government. They're always months behind. But one little part of this that certainly worries me is the collusion of the government, particularly intelligence agencies, in which it looks like, I saw that in Congress, where they were colluding with tech companies and I believe violating our freedom. That is a real threat to our freedom. That's a real threat to our liberties. And so I do think we have the highest levels of government have been colluding to hold back our freedoms and to attack our privacy. So I encourage folks to get involved, continue to see the great work of Judicial Watch going after trying to determine who's actually doing these things and why they're doing them and how they're exposed to the left. And there's certainly many threats to our freedom. Again, the answer to control on speech has always been more speech. The answer for those who demand more government control is we demand more freedom. And at the end of the day, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on education, it's all about more freedom and more choices and more opportunity. And that always is a fantastic way to sell and push back against the left. At the end of the day, it is about control. And at the end of the day, the Heartland Institute, Judicial Watch, James O'Keefe, and all those, we're all about freedom. And we're about opportunity because we believe in that fantastic, amazing power of liberty in the individual over the collective, quote-unquote, wisdom of big government.
Well, I think that's a fantastic message, and I definitely appreciate you joining us today to sort of lend some insight into that, the importance of freedom, the importance of liberty, and how those things lead to innovation, the great leaps and bounds that we've seen in technology and innovation over the past few decades when it comes to the internet. Something that here at Judicial Watch we are actively trying to protect and preserve, and something that you're doing at the Heartland Institute as well. So what I would encourage all of our viewers here to do is to make sure to follow the Heartland Institute's great work. You can follow them on Twitter at Heartland Inst. So that's HeartlandInst. So Heartland Inst. And you can follow Congressman Huelskamp on Twitter as well at Cong Huelskamp. So that's CongHuelskamp, Cong Huelskamp at twitter.com. Follow the great work that they're doing because the preservation of liberty is important. And here at Judicial Watch, we're glad to see organizations like yours taking up the good fight.
And likewise, and that's how we defeat the big left on this, is we have to have multiple voices and multiple avenues of putting out the truth, multiple ways of spreading our message. So even if folks are shadow banned on Twitter or blacked out on Facebook, or take your pick, the left is coming after us. So we pop up and we find another way to deliver that message. At the end of the day, though, people still control the government. And it is our responsibility, it's the responsibility of you and me and all of our listeners to step up to the plate, sitting back and waiting to be fed the nightly news of fake news and the nightly media and the dribble that has nothing to do with daily lives, but be fed the fantastic message of innovation and freedom. And it's always under threat, but it's always a fantastic opportunity to work with Judicial Watch and other leaders in fighting for freedom. So thank you for having me on today.
And we were very glad to have you. So thank you very much, Congressman Huelskamp. Everyone be sure to check out the good work that the Heartland Institute does. And of course, put in a plug for our organization here. Keep following our work here at Judicial Watch. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube to keep up with our efforts to preserve our great constitutional system and to hold the government accountable. So thank you for joining us today, Congressman Huelskamp. And for Inside Judicial Watch, I'm Jerry Dunleavy. Be sure to tune in next time. Thanks.